Hello, and welcome back to What We Have in Common. I'm Darren Hamilton. Last episode, we talked about the issues that nobody owns, those pesky little political spaces where Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians all look at the same thing and collectively say, yeah, that seems a little messed up. Privacy might be the biggest one. Nobody actually enjoys the idea of constantly being observed, at least not outside of reality television or certain political careers. What's really creeping us out, though, is that we can't seem to agree on who's doing the watching. As a Libertarian candidate, I get accused of a lot of things, being a spoiler, being a shill for one party or the other. But before anyone accuses me of wearing a tinfoil hat, let me point out that this is not a conspiracy episode. This is a you already clicked accept episode. And that's actually worse because at least conspiracies are interesting. Many people assume that privacy is one of those niche libertarian obsessions. It isn't. Privacy is one of the few issues that almost everybody agrees on. Democrats talk about privacy in terms of protecting individuals from corporate surveillance and government overreach. Libertarians talk about privacy in terms of limiting concentrated power, regardless of whether that power wears a corporate logo or a government badge. Republicans often arrive at privacy concerns through an entirely different door: skepticism of federal surveillance and centralized authority. Three different diagnoses, same creepy feeling. And yet we've normalized something that would have sounded like science fiction or dystopian fiction not that long ago. And while we've been arguing over who to be worried about, we've quietly built the greatest surveillance network in human history, voluntarily. Let me start with something that should feel at least mildly alarming. How many of you have your phone within arm's reach right now? You don't need to look. I already know the answer. It's all of you. Some of you are watching this on your phone, which is appropriate because today we're going to spend some time insulting the most codependent relationship you've ever had. Now, think about what your phone already knows about you. It knows where you are, where you sleep, where you work, who you call, who you text, the restaurants where you eat, how fast you drive, how often you exercise, which in my case is mostly just my watch asking me, hey, are you still alive? My wrist has become disappointingly judgmental. My watch congratulates me for standing up because at my age, apparently I've reached a point where basic locomotion earns positive reinforcement. But every late night, how do I fix search that seemed like a good idea at 2 a.m. is logged. Every location ping is stored. Every purchase can be analyzed. Every interaction can be mapped. Every pattern can be inferred. And all of that data doesn't just sit there politely. It gets compiled, processed, analyzed, sold, sometimes shared, sometimes subpoenaed, sometimes leaked, sometimes accidentally exposed, which is a phrase that should never be comforting but has somehow become routine. And we're told that all of this is the price of convenience. And in fairness, there is convenience. It's very convenient, almost suspiciously convenient. Now, there are some people who will complain loudly, oh, they're secretly tracking us. Secretly? No, they asked. Remember those terms of service agreements, the ones you had to scroll down to the bottom of because they're longer than most state constitutions? The one where you literally scrolled through 73 pages of legal jargon that ended with, by clicking agree, you consent to. Yes, that one. We all treated that like Netflix asking, are you watching? Click, click, click. And then we're shocked to discover that it actually does what it said it would do, which none of us read. We literally purchased the surveillance device ourselves, stood in line overnight to get the newest one, and then paid extra for more storage so that it could remember us even better. We've become emotionally attached to our electronic parole officer. This isn't a conspiracy. Conspiracies require secret meetings. This is customer service. Now, I want to pause here to do something politically dangerous. I want to take the Democrats seriously on this issue because Democrats have spent years warning about surveillance capitalism, data extraction, algorithmic manipulation, and the relationship between corporate platforms and political behavior. And they're not wrong to worry about it. Corporations collect enormous amounts of data. But here's where libertarians diverge slightly from the standard framing, because for us, it's not about corporations, it's about capacity. The same systems that recommend a restaurant to you also shape what information you see about your government. The same systems that track consumer behavior also track political engagement. The same systems that optimize ads also optimize attention. And attention, it turns out, is not neutral. Attention is power. Now, this is where politicians usually stop, but where I keep going. Because if somebody knows everything about you, eventually someone will decide what to do with that information. And that's where I always ask, then what? A company collects everyone's location. Then what? The government can access years of digital history. Then what? Artificial intelligence can predict your behavior before you've even made a decision. Then what? We need more data. Okay, then what? Then we'll know where everyone is. Then what? Then we'll know who they're talking to. Then what? Well, then we'll know what they buy. Then what? Because collecting information is never the end of the story. Information exists for one reason: to be used. Nobody spends billions of dollars collecting data because they enjoy spreadsheets. There's always another step, always. Politics has a terrible habit of pretending that step one is also the last step. It never is. Politics also is particularly bad at asking what step two looks like. And when you build systems that can observe everything, they will be used to observe everything. Not always by the people you expected, and not always for the reasons you intended. That's the pattern. Not malice, incentives, scale, and inertia. Because once surveillance becomes possible, it becomes useful. And once it becomes useful, it becomes normal. And once it becomes normal, it becomes very difficult to stop. Until eventually we wake up in a world where privacy feels less like a right and more like a premium subscription tier. And that's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. Privacy disappears the same way your garage fills up. One box at a time, one feature at a time, one update at a time. One notification asking allow app to access your location. Fine, sure. Harvest my metadata only while using the app, whatever gets me to the recipe without reading your grandmother's biography first. The next thing you know, your refrigerator knows you're out of spicy mustard. I didn't even know my refrigerator found out I had spicy mustard. We're not dealing with a sudden transformation problem. We're dealing with an accumulation problem. One feature at a time, one update at a time, one improved user experience at a time. Which brings us to Steve. Remember Steve? Steve works for your government. Steve isn't corrupt. Steve isn't evil. Steve still microwaves fish in the office break room, but that's a separate issue. Steve didn't invent mass surveillance. Steve got assigned to it. On Monday morning, Steve logs into work. Behold, there's a new software update. Congratulations, Steve. You now have 3 new dashboards, 2 predictive analytics reports, facial recognition, location history, social network mapping, and an AI assistant named Cheryl. Steve didn't ask for Cheryl. Nobody asked for Cheryl. She just arrives as part of the software update. Now Steve has access to information that would have made the East German secret police weep with envy. Not because Steve demanded it, but because somebody somewhere decided, you know what Steve needs? More tabs. Steve doesn't wake up thinking, how can I violate everybody's civil liberties today? Steve wakes up thinking, I have 37 cases before lunch. Steve doesn't become dangerous because he has changed. Steve becomes dangerous because the tools have changed. That's why the real question isn't whether Steve is a good guy, it's whether Steve should have those tools in the first place. Because every generation of Steve inherits a slightly more powerful computer than the last one. This is why I use something that I call the universal government test. Whenever somebody proposes giving government a shiny new power, I don't picture my favorite politician. No, I picture the other one, the one that makes me yell at Facebook. Would you support giving that person this authority? Because here's a fun fact, your favorite politician eventually retires, and your least favorite politician eventually wins. Usually right after you've posted, I'm moving to Canada. Spoiler alert, you never do. Even the celebrities who threaten to do so never do, which kind of explains how flaky they really are. But the law stays. The office stays. Steve stays. Only the nameplate changes. So if the idea scares you when the other team has it, then maybe nobody should have it. Now here's why this issue is fascinating. Because this isn't really about Apple or Google or Meta or even Washington. It's about building systems that know everything. And history has a funny way of treating those like a challenge. Democrats will often frame this as a corporate accountability issue. Libertarians will frame it as a power limitation issue. And both of those frames point toward the same conclusion. If a system can collect everything, eventually it will. The only question is whether there are meaningful constraints. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of those constraints are not technical. They're political. And political constraints require something we've systematically been weakening for years: public awareness. Because it's hard to care about surveillance when it's invisible. It's hard to resist systems when they're convenient. And it's hard to debate boundaries when the default setting is already yes. Privacy isn't a luxury good. It's not something you opt into. It's something you lose gradually, usually without noticing the individual steps, like gravity, but for civil liberties. Because privacy was never about having something to hide. It's about deciding where your boundaries are. Because freedom without boundaries isn't freedom. It's just indecent exposure. Privacy is about having a room where nobody else gets a vote, a conversation that isn't recorded, a purchase that isn't analyzed, a mistake that isn't permanent, a life that isn't scored by an algorithm trying to decide whether you deserve a coupon for hemorrhoid cream. And that, more than anything else, is why privacy still matters. Not because we have something to hide, but because we still deserve the space to decide what we reveal about ourselves. Not on their terms, on our terms. So the question becomes, at what point do we stop calling this innovation and start calling it exposure? Because there is a difference. Innovation expands what we can do. Exposure expands what can be done to us. And if we don't draw that line deliberately, someone else will draw it for us. Probably in a settings menu that we didn't read. I'm Darren Hamilton, Libertarian candidate for Texas House District 57. My campaign isn't about asking you to trust me. It's about building a government that doesn't require you to trust anyone quite so much. Because politicians change, administrations change, parties change. Steve eventually gets promoted. But databases, they don't go anywhere. So before we create another program, another surveillance tool, another emergency power, run it through the universal government test. Would you still support it if your least favorite politician inherited it tomorrow? If not, maybe nobody should have that power. Because the best way to protect your freedom isn't to elect better rulers. It's to leave fewer opportunities for the next one to rule over you.